Hey everybody, welcome back. Our Scottish Wee Heavy has been fermenting now for 2 weeks. So we're gonna take a gravity reading here and we're gonna see if we're ready to transfer it in to secondary fermentation. We're gonna clarify it with some gelatin findings. I'm gonna show you how to do that. And then I'm gonna go through some steps of some simple ways that we can add some barrel aging flavor to this beer. There's many options out there and I'm gonna show you my tried and true, super simple and safe way to do that. So if you remember correctly, our Scottish Wee Heavy is a huge starting gravity. It's a big boozy beer. Our original gravity on this was 1.114, okay? And if we hit our estimated final gravity of 1.022 or 1.024 most likely, we're looking at a 12% Scottish Wee Heavy. So full transparency, I did take a gravity reading after a week of fermentation. Typically when I make a beer, after 7 days, I take a gravity reading and 95% of those beers are completely done, fermented through at the final gravity. I'm ready to transfer, I'm ready to clarify, I'm ready to dry hop or rack it into a keg or can it or bottle it, whatever. It's finished, right? So all we have left is the carbonation and the tasting. So I took a gravity reading of this and it was at 1.050. So I knew the gravity was still pretty high on it and it had a ways to go yet. If you remember back, we only added in 1 packet of yeast. And that's a little bit naive on my part, and I'll be honest with you on that. Since we only had 2 gallons of starting wort, I figured that 1 packet of dry yeast would be plenty. Typically, when you have any beer with an original gravity of 1.060 or higher, you're gonna need to use more yeast. 2 yeast packets, rehydrate yeast, a liquid yeast starter, things like that. But since it was only 2 gallons, I thought that that full 11.5 gram dry yeast packet would be plenty for this beer. I was a little naive in that fact because being a 12% beer, there was a crap ton of sugar in this beer that those yeast had to work their way through to convert into alcohol. And it took a lot longer. It's been slow going. Now, as you can tell, if you look at this carefully, pretty much all the yeast is settled on the bottom. It's looking pretty clear already, and there's no activity in our airlock. So what's done is done. I don't think there's any extra fermentation that's gonna happen. So we're gonna take the top off here and we're gonna take a gravity reading. Now, we're gonna use our thief here. I've got my secondary fermenter here, full of sanitizer. I got my siphon in there, soaking in the sanitizer. I also soaked my thief in there. Now you're probably wondering why I have an entire full second 3-gallon fermenter full of sanitizer. I keep a 5-gallon keg of sanitizer on hand at all times. I have extra kegs and I mix up a huge batch of sanitizer and I keep it on hand because I use it when I'm transferring beers all the time, but I also use it when I'm cleaning my kegerator. It's very easy for me. I have a keg full of cleaner, PBW cleaner. I put that on, so if I have a beer that kicks on tap, I'll take that keg off, I'll put the cleaner in, I'll run the cleaner through the lines for 10 minutes, I'll pull that off, and then I take my keg of sanitizer and I'll sanitize those lines for a few minutes too. So it's always great having it on hand so you don't always have to mix it up. Now, you may or may not have that opportunity to keep sanitizer on hand in a keg like I do. So that's why this is completely full. If I didn't have that keg of sanitizer, I'd probably mix up just a little batch of sanitizer in here. The other thing I love to have is a side spray bottle with sanitizer in it, because then you can just take your equipment that you're gonna use, you can spot spray it, and then you don't have to mix up the sanitizer at all. But since I already had it on hand, that's why that's that way. So we already sanitized our thief. We've got our graduated cylinder here and we've got our hydrometer. So we're gonna carefully take this top off and we're gonna go for a gravity reading. Now I'm kind of assuming that this beer is still gonna be a little bit on the high side. What I could have done and what you can do if you get to the point where you don't feel like your beer is fermenting all the way through, or what we call attenuating, getting down to that final gravity, what you can do is you can add more yeast. You could sprinkle another yeast packet in. You could rehydrate some yeast. You could add a little bit extra wort, or kind of like a liquid yeast starter to give it a little bit more sugar with your new yeast to kind of reactivate that fermentation. You could take your fermenter very gently and swirl it around to get that yeast back in suspension. But like I said, this beer was so big that I probably stressed out those yeast a little bit by not really, sending enough soldiers into battle for all the sugar that's in here. So with this thief, you just kind of shake it up and down very gently. Again, at this point, we're trying to stick away from any oxygen or oxidation in our beer. We don't want to splash it around. We don't want to make a whole bunch of bubbles and things like that. We're trying to keep everything as still and calm as possible. So we're gonna fill this up pretty good here. Take this out, and we're just gonna run this thief down the side. I always start with my hydrometer in there, so I don't have to guess on what the level is. I've done that before. I filled it up too high, I put the hydrometer in, it overflows and spills over the top. You obviously want enough liquid in here so that the hydrometer is in suspension, it's bobbing, but you don't want it spilling over, and you don't want it so there's not enough, and then your hydrometer is bottoming out and hitting the bottom. So I think we got what we want. I'm gonna set this in the sink here just a second. So we're gonna spin this around, and I can see already it's still pretty high. It's not at 1050 anymore, which is a good thing. Make sure this is in the center. So we're at 1030. We were shooting for 1024. It's at 1030. So it's still a little bit on the higher range. Here's what we could do. We could leave it in primary fermentation a little bit longer. The one thing I do want to be careful about, though, is you don't want to leave your beer on the yeast cake for too long. A couple weeks, 3 weeks, maybe even up to a month is okay. But once you start getting past that, your beer sitting on that used yeast cake and stuff can start to impart some off flavors. So that's why, my rule of thumb is usually a week, and I get it off of that. That's why I always like to rack into secondary, and then clarify the beer from there, just to get it off that yeast cake and leave all that junk behind. I could get this in suspension again to try to get those points to drop a little bit more, but like I said, I wasn't seeing very much action out of the airlock, so I know fermentation's pretty much done. I could mix up some more yeast and reintroduce some more yeast to it to try to get it to drop, but we're only about 6 points off of our final gravity. And here's the cool thing about this beer. Since we have such a high alcohol content beer, okay, letting it finish a little bit on the sweeter side is gonna be okay. It actually might even be better, okay? Because what that sweetness is gonna do, it's gonna counterbalance with some of that alcohol booziness that you would get out of this typical beer. I ran the numbers here, so we were shooting for about a 12% beer. Since we finished about 6 points off, we're gonna be just over 11%. That is still a real awesome dip kicker of a winter warmer beer. And we're gonna be adding some bourbon-oak flavor to it as well in secondary, and I'm gonna show you how to do that in a minute. So I'm pretty happy with this. Here's the other cool thing you could do after you take your gravity reading is actually take a sip and see what it tastes like. Now, obviously, there's no carbonation in this, so it's not gonna taste exactly like a finished beer, but you're gonna get some characteristics of what the overall body of the beer and the flavor of this beer. It smells like pretty good. Like this is a malt forward beer to begin with. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yes. Wow. We are definitely stopping right now. It is, I don't even know how to describe it. So there's definitely some booze in here. So I can taste that right away. Anybody that's gonna taste this is know that they're gonna know this is a double-digit ABV beer. But that residual sweetness with the final gravity finishing a little bit higher is pleasant. It doesn't have that fusel burn like alcohol has, like if you're doing a shot of something. But you definitely know it's there. But it does have this nice sweetness, this malt forward body to it, which I think is going to be great. And it's going to go really well when we add in that bourbon oak flavor to it as well. So we're going to call it good at 10:30. I'll crunch the numbers again, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be at about 11%. So the next thing we need to do now is we're going to carefully transfer this beer out of here into our sanitized secondary fermentation fermenter. And then we're going to clarify with some gelatin to make sure it is beautiful, crystal clean. And then we're going to talk about the steps to barrel age this beer. All right, let me get this all set up and we'll start transferring. All right, before we transfer our beer into our secondary fermenter, we are going to talk about how to clarify your beer. There's basically two ways of doing this, and both of them work really good. You can do one or the other, or you can be crazy and over the top like me and do both of them. I've always done both, and it's cheap and simple and easy, and my beers always turn out looking just like they come from a commercial brewery. So the first and easiest way is to cold crash your beer, which means taking your finished beer in your fermenter and putting it into a cold kegerator or in your refrigerator at like 37, 38 degrees. Letting it sit for 24 to 48 hours, and everything that's in that beer, any proteins that are left or anything, will clump up and drop out on the bottom. And then you can transfer or rack any of that clean beer off of whatever settles out into your bottling bucket if you're bottling, or back into a keg if you're ready to carbonate it and have it on tap. What I like to do even before that is I like to add in some gelatin findings. Okay, this is Knox gelatin. It is unflavored gelatin. If you've ever made Jello shots before, this is probably what you use. What I'm gonna do is, first of all, you need water and some dry gelatin here. Now, we only have 2 gallons of beer, so we don't need to use this whole entire packet. I think to clarify your beer with gelatin, you can use like a teaspoon for 1 cup of water. So we're gonna start, I think I'm only gonna use half a cup of water because we only have 2 gallons. So I got my measuring cup here, and you wanna start with cold tap water, as cold as you can get it. It doesn't need to have ice in it, but you wanna start with cold tap water. Now, you can buy this Knox gelatin in these packets. They come in a big box. That's what I buy. Or you can even order it. I think if you order it on Amazon, you can even get it in a container, like almost like a Kool-Aid container, where you can come out and you can scoop like a teaspoon out. But what you do is you get your cold water first, and then what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna sprinkle the gelatin on top gently, and you wanna cover the entire surface area of the water. You don't wanna clump it up too much. You wanna just kind of cover that top like that. So that's kind of what it looks like right now, and it's just sitting on top. What you're gonna do is you're gonna set this off to the side and let it rest for about 15 to 20 minutes. And what you're gonna see happening, they call it, the gelatin is going to bloom. You're gonna see when it blooms, it's going to start to look like this coagulated, snotty gelatin mess kind of floating in there, almost like a jellyfish floating in water. When that is ready, then we'll move on to our next step. So come back in about 15 minutes. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes, and as you can see, I'm gonna bring this up close. Do you see how that gelatin has bloomed? It is a gelatinous mess in there, and you can see it's all thick and curdled up. That is exactly what you want. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this gelatin and we're gonna give it little bursts of heat in the microwave. We're gonna flash heat this for 15 seconds at a time and stir it up. So what that's gonna do is that is going to allow the gelatin to dissolve in the water, clean and clear, without actually cooking it. So we're gonna do little 15-minute bursts, and then we're gonna stir it up with our whisk until it is clean and see-through, transparent. So there's 15 seconds. We're gonna give it a little stir. As you can see, A lot of the gelatinous mess has already gone, but it's still pretty cloudy. Usually it takes about 3 to 4 times of doing this. Again, you want it transparent, you want it clear, but you don't want to overheat it because you don't actually want to end up with gelatin. You don't want thick gelatin going into your beer. You just want the gelatin dissolved completely in the liquid. So I say you don't want gelatin in your beer, but we are honestly putting a little bit of gelatin. But look at that, that's already pretty clear. We're gonna give it another little stir here to make sure it's all mixed in. And like I said, we're only doing a half a cup for 2 gallons of beer. So this process is gonna be a lot faster than what it usually is. When I'm doing bigger 5 to 10 gallon batches of beer, I usually do a cup or 2 cups of water with a couple teaspoons of gelatin, and then mixing that up, and I'm pouring it into usually a couple secondary fermenters. So we might be good here with this third flash heating. Let's take a look at what it looks like here. All right, yeah, that is looking great. So I don't even really, I'll give it one more stir. I don't really need to because it is transparent exactly the way we want it. So let's bring that in there. See that? It looks almost clear like water. That's exactly what we want. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna add this into our secondary fermenter, and then we're gonna rack that wee heavy beer on top of it. And as we rack it on top of it, it's gonna thoroughly mix in with this liquid. And now what gelatin does is it helps collect, I wanna say coagulate again, I don't know why that word's stuck in my head, but it's gonna grab all of those leftover proteins and things in that beer. It's gonna clump them together and it's gonna drop them out to the bottom. So only thing that's left behind is clean beer. Now, we're doing this and we're gonna cold crash it, so we know that if there's any material left in that beer, it's definitely gonna end up on the bottom of the secondary fermenter, and we only need to do this for about 48 hours. So we're gonna add the gelatin, we're gonna cold crash for 48 hours, and then we're gonna be ready to either rack it into our bottling bucket if you're bottling, or rack it into a keg to carbonate it that way. But we're also gonna add in some bourbon oak flavor. We're gonna get to that next. Okay, now we are ready to transfer our beer into our secondary fermenter. We got our sanitized fermenter, we got our sanitized siphon. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're going to take our siphon out and get this set up. So actually, let's do this. Let's take the top off. We're gonna save our airlock and our bung here because we're gonna put this right onto our secondary fermenter. We are going to use a new fresh sanitized lid though. So this one is going to go into the sink to be washed. But we're gonna set this up. Now during this stage, again, we're trying to keep as much oxygen out of the beer as possible. Now as you can see, as this is open, there is oxygen getting in. But I'm gonna show you what we're gonna do to that to get that out too, because we're gonna purge it with CO2. So we've got our gelatin findings that we flash heated in the microwave. We're gonna take this and we're gonna add this into the secondary fermentation vessel first. Now, if you forget to add that in first, that's okay, because you can always add it in after you rack the beer. I like to put it in first because it's at the bottom of the fermenter now, and as we siphon this beer in there, the beer is gonna naturally just mix in with that gelatin at the bottom. So we wanna do this very slowly and carefully. So we're gonna give this a couple pumps to get it started. We wanna make sure that it's not on the bottom of our primary fermenter, because that is where all of our junk is, our yeast, our spent yeast cake, our hop trube, what's ever left from primary fermentation. So I'm gonna keep an eye on this here on the side. I bought this little clamp too, which is nice, because you could set it at a certain level and then walk away and be good with it. But what's happening is this beer is very slowly swirling around, mixing in with that gelatin, and it's not creating any bubbles, which would be a sign of oxygen. So we're gonna rack this and siphon it all the way down to mix in with that, and then we're gonna put on our new lid with our airlock and sanitizer, and then we're gonna talk about the most important ingredient in this beer, the oak and the bourbon. And I'm gonna show you some fun ways to do that very easy as a home brewer. All right, check this out. So as you can see, our beer is completely transferred from primary fermentation into our secondary fermentation vessel. What I told you is, yes, we expose it to oxygen. Here's a way to get that oxygen out of your beer. I happen to have a small CO2 tank that I use with my kegerator at home. So what I like to do is before I put my airlock on, I like to take my hose and just put it in here, and I'm gonna put a blanket of CO2 in this beer. So that should be good, and I'm gonna quick put the airlock on. And what just happened is, since CO2 is heavier than oxygen, when I pumped that CO2 in, it created a blanket around the beer, and it pushed all of the lighter oxygen out through the top. When I put my airlock on, I've got this blanket of CO2 in there protecting my beer and keeping any oxidation away from it. If you don't have CO2, first of all, if you haven't started kegging yet, you really should, because kegging beer is so much easier. And you can still bottle or can off of your kegs if you want to bring those places. But hey, Cold Break makes so many awesome pieces of equipment that make taking your beer and serving your beer everywhere so much cooler and so much easier. You just need to start kegging, okay? If you don't have CO2, what you want to do then is when you're transferring into a secondary fermentation vessel, you want to try to leave as much or get as little headspace as possible. So this was 2 gallons. This is a 3-gallon fermenter. I'd probably want a 2-gallon fermenter, and I would fill it right up as close as I could to the top. That way I know that there's not a big layer of oxygen on top. This has quite a bit of headspace, so I know there was a bunch of oxygen in there after I transferred it. So that's why I hit it with some CO2. Now we are ready for the final step before we're ready to carbonate this beer. Look how nice and clean this beer is now. We took it off of all of that junk. We were very careful when we were transferring it. There's usually, I always leave a 1/4 of an inch or so of beer left behind because I don't want to be pulling any of that off the bottom and putting it into my clean beer. So this is good. That's part of that total volume that I told you we were going to end up wasting at the beginning anyway. You know, we boil off some through evaporation during the boil and the brew day, and then we also lose some during the fermentation process through the leftover spent yeast and things like that when we transfer it here. But now everything that's left is our own clean, crisp, clean beer that we're going to enjoy. Let's talk about how to barrel age this beer now. So if you're a craft beer enthusiast like me, you've been to your favorite brewery or bar and you've had that barrel-aged Russian Imperial Stout or that barrel-aged barley wine or that barrel-aged wee heavy. You've had a 1/2 pint or a snifter of that big, boozy, double-digit ABV dick kicker of a beer and you love it. We're gonna make that beer here. Now, in order to do that, you might be thinking, wow, do I need to purchase an oak barrel and rack this beer into that barrel and sit and wait on it months and months and painstakingly as some of that beer inevitably evaporates to the angel share and I end up with even less of my beer after I started? Yes, you can do that, but I would say don't waste your time or your money, okay? You can buy a barrel and spend a lot of money on that barrel. You're gonna have to condition that barrel by adding in your favorite bourbon, swirling it around and letting that oak soak it in. Then you're gonna have to rack your beer into that and you're going to have to wait on it for months and months and months until you get the desired flavor you want. That's very expensive, it takes a long time, and things can go wrong with that because those barrels are porous, okay? They're gonna let things in and out of that beer. That's why the angel share, some of that evaporation ends up disappearing, okay? I've done that. I bought an oak barrel. I barrel aged the authentic way and it turned out okay, but I found there are many other ways to do it. The next way that you can do it is by adding in either wood chips or wood spirals, okay? Now, you can buy these right at your craft homebrew store, You can order them online too. These are LD Carlson. I got them at my homebrew store. $3.69 for 4 ounces of American oak chips. Okay, these are basically the barrel ground up into almost like bark mulch, not mulch, but chips, right? So what you can do is you can take these chips, you can measure them out, and you can dump them right in your secondary fermenter and just let them soak in there. Now, the longer you let them soak, the more oak flavor you'll get, but you're gonna probably only need them soaking for a couple weeks. You let them soak in there for a couple weeks, take your beer out, you're good to go. Doing that is a much cheaper and easier method, but again, there's a little bit of risk to that because you don't quite know when too much is too much or not enough and things like that. So you're playing that game of tasting, and every time you taste, every time you open this up and take a sample, you're introducing oxygen into it, and you could have off flavors and all that stuff. So here is my tried and true, super simple method that I would love for you to try, and not just with this beer, with all kinds of stuff. And it's called making your own tincture. What a tincture is basically you're making your own extract using wood and alcohol, okay? So since we're doing a bourbon oak beer, we're gonna be using these American oak chips, and we're gonna be using some bourbon, and we're gonna be soaking them in the bourbon in a mason jar, okay? So here is one that I had already done. As you can see, the bourbon's in there. You can see the oak chips that are soaking in there. These have been soaking in this bourbon for a couple weeks, so they are done. When they're all done after a couple weeks, what I do is I open this up, I use a strainer, and then I strain all the liquid off, either like a coffee filter or some sort of filter or strainer like that. And then you just take the chips and you throw them away and you clean your mason jar. So this is finished oak flavored bourbon that I have in this mason jar. And this is good for almost ever, right? It's just like having your bourbon here in your bottle that you can be sitting on your shelf for years. But we just imparted a whole bunch of oak flavor with our chips or our spirals, okay? So you can use this for your beer, but you can also even drink it. Holy smokes, that's got a ton of oak in it still. Man, that's awesome. But the reason why I make a concentrated tincture, and this is tried and true, because I'll tell you why my success with this, entering beers in competitions, okay? What you're gonna do is when this beer is done, okay, we're gonna have an 11% Scottish Wee Heavy base style beer. Perfect, okay? We can keg it and carbonate it, or we can take half of it and bottle and can it. So you still have your base beer. The other half, what you can do is you can flavor them by the bottle or by the can or even by the pint or snifter glass, okay? So I like to always keep my base beers as is, and then I add flavor in by the beer. So what I do is I use this little pipette, okay? And when I have my finished oak, what I'll do is I will take the pipette and I will pour myself usually about a 3-ounce sample, and I will take my pipette and I will count how many drops that I want in there. So I'll like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So maybe I'll put 5 drops in, 5 or 6 drops in, and then I'll take my finished beer that's carbonated on tap. Usually for me it's on tap. But if it was in a bottle, I would take 3 ounces of that. I would swirl it around, smell it, taste it. Is there enough bourbon in there? Is there not enough bourbon? Do I want to try 8 drops? Do I want to try 10 drops? When I get it to the level that I like personally, maybe you like more bourbon, maybe you like less bourbon, maybe you like more oak, maybe you want less oak. When you get it to the spot where you want, for that 3-ounce sample, all you're gonna do is scale that up. If you're bottling in 12-ounce bottles, you just take that. So if I added 5 drops of bourbon in for a 3-ounce sample, well, I'm gonna multiply that by 4, and I'm gonna add 20 drops for a bottle. So what I'll do is I'll take this, I'll put 20 drops in a bottle, and then I'll take my carbonated base beer, fill that bottle up, cap it, or what I do is I can beer, so I'll put on my canner and can it. And now I have a barrel-aged oak flavored beer, and I still have my base beer. So basically you have 2 beers. Now you might be thinking, wow, this is a cheating method. Okay, it's not gonna taste the same as coming straight out of an oak barrel. I will tell you this, I experimented with this with a competition beer. I went for an entire year, I entered the same exact beer that I flavored with a tincture, with an oak tincture. I entered it in 4 different competitions, and that beer got a gold medal in all 4 competitions, and all 4 of those scores were within 1.5 points of each other. So I know the judges recognize this as an oak flavored beer, and it was super consistent for the whole year. You are controlling 100% of the amount of flavor you're putting into the beer. Instead of just dumping some chips in there and hoping you get enough, or hoping it's not overpowered and things like that, and kind of basically the risk reward isn't worth it to me, okay? We put a lot of money into this beer, we spent a lot of time making it. Let's not ruin it by one false move of dumping something in or racking it into a barrel and having oxidation happen to it, or bugs or bacteria or something get into it. This can sit in your pantry, on your shelf, with your bourbon collection forever. And you can drink it if you want on your own, but you can use it for other beers. So once I have this tincture, now I take, my chocolate peanut butter sweet stout that I love, that I have canned, or beers I buy at the store. If I buy a stout or a porter at the store, just a base one, I take and pour it in. I'm doing it in a plastic glass, but if I'm pouring it into a pint glass, and now I want a barrel-aged version of that, here we go. I got my pipette, I just poured in my base, my chocolate peanut butter sweet stout. That is my flagship beer here at Outside the Box Brewing Company. I brew it all the time. It is my favorite beer. But now, check this out. We can take our oak bourbon tincture. We can add some of that into this pint glass. Look at that. Swirl this around. Now we just took our chocolate peanut butter sweet stout and we just barrel aged it with our tincture. Oh my gosh, you can smell it right away too. It's amazing. Man, that's awesome. If you want to add more to it, you can. If you want to back off a little bit, you can. But the beauty of having a tincture is you can use it for the beer that you made. You can use it for any beer. You want to buy a blonde ale and add some bourbon to it? Bam, that's it. It's got the oak flavor. You're not going to just dump straight bourbon into it. Now, the other question is, okay, well, now you're adding alcohol into the beer. What is that doing for the overall ABV? We're using a pipette, okay? We're adding in drops of it, okay? It's not going to change the ABV at all. You're going to get all aroma through your nose, and you're going to get the flavor from the oak and the bourbon. 5 drops, 8 drops, whatever that you put in here. So minuscule, but it creates a totally new beer. And that's what I would suggest you do. So how do we do that? Here we go. Take a mason jar. Now, I would suggest making more than less, okay? If you want to only make enough tincture for just the beer that you made, totally go ahead and do it. Like I said though, make more than you need because it will sit and last forever, and you can have it on hand for everything else. So, take your mason jar. Since I already have quite a bit, I'm just gonna show you a small batch, but you can make it. What I typically do is I'll fill it up to 1 cup. I'll put 1 cup of alcohol in, and then I'll measure out my chips and put those in. I usually end up putting more oak in than necessary. I make a more concentrated, higher oak liquid because I'm just using the pipette anyway, and I'm controlling the flavor that way. So it's better to have it stronger than weaker. But what alcohol do you use? You literally, since you're making a tincture, you're stripping the aroma and the flavor off of these oak chips. Okay, basically you're creating your own extract. You can use really cheap whiskey and bourbon. Okay, you can, hey, Kirkland blended Scotch whiskey is great. It's like 25 bucks for a half gallon. It tastes good on its own, and it makes great tinctures, okay? I use Kirkland vodka all the time for my other tinctures, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But for this, I just like, just a good tasting run-of-the-mill bourbon. I'm using Buffalo Trace, okay? You don't want to use your super high-end bourbons. Like, if your bourbon comes in a bag with a topper on it, like Caribou Crossing, that's a beautiful bourbon whiskey that you're going to be sipping on. Or if your bourbon or whiskey comes in its own box, its own velvet lined box here, like this old Emmer I got for my birthday. This is like a $150 bottle of bourbon. I'm not going to be using this to make a tincture for my beer. No, that is my share with friends sipping bourbon. Use something like Buffalo Trace. Awesome on its own, okay? But what we're going to do is we're just going to dump this in. Typically, like I said, I would do a cup. Today, just for this video, I'm going to show you where I'm going to put in like 4 ounces. Okay, so there we go. We got our bourbon. Smells great, tastes great. And then measure out how many ounces of chips. Now, this 4-ounce bag will make up to 25 gallons of beer. Okay, 4 ounces, 25 gallons. That's like 1 ounce for every 6 gallons of beer. We have 2 gallons of beer here. Let's just make this stronger. Let's put in 1 ounce. So if you got a scale, I do, right here, you can measure it out, or you can dump the whole bag in. If you dump all 4 ounces into that, it is gonna taste like you're, you're drinking straight off of an oak tree. It's gonna be super potent. So right now in my bag, I have 2.5 ounces of chips left. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna dump some in. I'm gonna try to get an ounce in here. And this ounce for 4 ounces is probably too much. I should probably only do a half ounce. So I had 2.5. Boom, look, oh my gosh, look at that. I don't know how lucky that I got there, but now I got 2 ounces left. So I just put a half ounce of American oak chips in there with 4 ounces of bourbon. As you can see, they're floating in there. Again, you can make it stronger because you're gonna be using this to control the flavor anyway. If I made this super strong, I would only put in 2 or 3 drops maybe into my beer. If it was more on the weaker side, I might need more, 6, 7, 8 drops. But what you do is you got it in here, give it a good shake it up, and it's gonna look still pretty clear. You're gonna put this in your cupboard, in your pantry, down with your bourbon collection. You're gonna let it sit. If you remember, go down there once a day. Every day, pick it up, give it a shake. You're gonna do that for about a week to 2 weeks. I usually go 2 weeks, okay? After 2 weeks, all of that aroma and flavor that's in those oak chips is going to be stripped out by that bourbon. Then what you can do is you can open it up, you can use a coffee filter, you can use some other strainer, take all the liquid off like I did here, okay? And then take those chips and just throw them away. Clean out your mason jar and save it for another time, or take that liquid and put it back in this mason jar that already had that bourbon flavor in it. And then you got yourself a tincture that you can use all the time. Then you can take your wee heavy, like I'm gonna show you when this is done and carbonated. I'm gonna use this liquid. We're gonna taste it on its own, and we're gonna taste it with the bourbon-oak in it. We're gonna have 2 beers for the price of 1, and we have leftover bourbon-oak flavor for any other uses that we want. If we have another beer that we want to flavor, or if we buy beer from the store, we got it. Isn't that awesome? I'm known in kind of the homebrew community where I'm from is kind of the tincture guy. One last little note about tinctures. The only time I use bourbon or scotch or gin or tequila is when I'm using those specific wood flavorings. So if I want to make a tequila barrel beer, I'm going to use tequila with the tequila chips. If I want to make a gin barrel beer, I'm going to use gin with my gin chips. But you can make a tincture out of anything. Peppers, spices, fruits. I have about 50 tinctures in my basement that I use for all kinds of beers. And what I do for those tinctures is I use a neutral spirit like vodka. Kirkland vodka, 15 bucks for a half gallon. This will go a long way, okay? But I have peppers, fresh picked from my friend's garden. Carolina Reaper peppers. I'm not gonna take Carolina Reapers and dump them in a beer. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna split them. I'm gonna put them in a mason jar with a little bit of vodka. I'm gonna shake it up for about a week or two, and then I'm going to strain off those peppers, and now I have a pepper extract or a pepper tincture that I can use a droplet or a pipette for, and I can put it in my IPA. If I want a little spice in my IPA or in my Mexican stout, I can add a little bit of heat, a couple drops, just to give me that little bit of heat and that little bit of smoke on the back end. I don't want to dose a whole entire batch of beer and hope it turns out. I'm going to use a tincture. I've done lavender, chamomile, different orange peels and lime peels, cinnamon, cocoa nibs, you name it. You can make your own extract tincture using this method, and you have 100% control over how much flavor goes into your beer. You will never ruin an entire batch of beer by saying, oh, I got some lavender, I'm gonna dump it in this beer or this cider and hope it turns out, and next thing you know, it's like you're drinking soap because you put too much in. No, you got a little bit in a mason jar, you do a couple drops, you taste it, a couple more, ooh, that's too much, back off a little bit, and then you scale it up from there when you get it to your liking. All right, now that was a long, drawn-out speech about tinctures, but whenever you make a barrel-aged beer, you don't need an oak barrel. You don't need to take your chips or your spirals and actually dump them in the beer. Lots of people do it. Do they make good beer? Yes, but why not be smart and safe about it, and on top of that, end up with a product that you can use in multiple various ways for other beers, like my now barrel-aged chocolate imperial stout. So let's get this cold crashed, let's get this carbonated, and let's try this wee heavy on its own and a barrel-aged version of this wee heavy in a couple days. Cheers, cold break. We'll see you back. I gotta start canning this. This is awesome. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. It's been a week. We've been shaking up our little American oak bourbon tincture that I showed you how to make. We put our American oak chips in here. We added in some Buffalo Trace bourbon, and we've been shaking it up every day for over a week. So as you can see now with the color, all of that color off of those oak chips and hopefully all the flavor has been infused into that bourbon that we added in there. So now what we're gonna do, now that we have our tincture, what we're gonna do is we're going to filter off of those oak chips to get just the liquid, and then we're gonna clean out and store it back in our container here. So let's take this off. I'm really excited to see how this smells. Wow, that is amazing. Now remember, we went on the heavy side with the oak and we used 1 cup of bourbon. So this is gonna be a very strong, concentrated tincture, but that's what we want because we're gonna use this little eyedropper and we're gonna control the amount of liquid that we add in with our beer. So it's always good to err on the side of keeping it a stronger concentrate than having a diluted one, because then you have to use more of the tincture. So this will last a really long time. So I'm just gonna, I've got this plastic coffee filter from an old coffee machine. We threw the coffee machine out, but I kept the filter because it works great when I am filtering out my tincture. So we're just gonna dump this bourbon through. Now when you're using oak chips or gin barrel chips or tequila chips, whatever wood barrel aged infused tincture that you're trying to do, you don't get a whole lot of sediment and other things from that. Like when I make my tinctures for spices like lavender and chamomile and some of those spices, you'll get a little bit more of that leftover sediment or material. That's why the filter is so important. But with this, you know, you're getting mostly just the liquid off of the wood. The chips are big enough where they're staying behind. So we've got that there. All right. Now what I'm gonna do later is I'm gonna clean this out. I'm gonna rinse it out really good. Throw the wood chips away, obviously. The oak chips, not wood chips. But they are wood, so I guess so. I'm gonna clean that out and then I will put that back in there because I label it on the top here with the date so I know when I made it, and when I put it downstairs with the rest of my tinctures in my tincture library, I will have that information. So the whole point of making this wood barrel aged tincture was really to get 2 beers out of this brew day. We've got our Scottish Wee Heavy. I threw it here in my Cold Break Cold one. So we got a small little 2-gallon batch, so it fit perfectly into our 2-gallon Senki keg that we have in the cold one here. But what we have now is we have the base that we get to enjoy, and then we get to flavor the exact amount of bourbon, wood, oak aged tincture that we want to put in it to give it a whole new flavor and profile. So really we got 2 beers. Now, if you wanted to, what you could do is, as you take a sample, I usually take about a 3, this is a 9-ounce cup, but typically what I do, if I'm gonna dose an entire keg of beer with a tincture, I'll usually pull a 3-ounce sample, and then I'll put a couple drops in, I'll record it, I'll smell it, I'll taste it. If I need to add more, or if it's too strong, I need to add less. I'll do that 3 or 4 times until I get the perfect amount, and then I'll scale that up. I'll do the math and I'll scale that up for the rest of the liquid that is left in that 2-gallon keg. That's if I'm going to dose the whole entire keg. So if I was going to, let's say we're going to a party and we wanted an oak aged Wee Heavy, the whole keg, then that's what I would do. I would measure it up, I'd scale it up, I'd add it to the keg, and that would be the beer. When I keep it at home like this, I love being able to have 2 beers out of it. I love keeping the base just as is, and then I like adding this oak tincture into the beer if I want it oak flavored, or if I want to just keep it as is. I've got 2 different versions. So let's go ahead and try the original version here. Let's go with, now remember, this is a big ass beer. Okay, we're talking double-digit ABV. Look at the color on that. I mean, it's probably hard for you to see with the lighting. It probably looks like a stout, but when you hold it up to the light, it is just this gorgeous caramel amber color. We got some good head retention there. On the top, we got that nice foamy white head. Oh, wow. I do remember this beer finished a little bit on the sweeter side. We didn't get all the way down to our full attenuation that we wanted, but at the same time, with a bigger boozy beer like this, I'm okay with it being a little bit sweeter on the back end, especially when we're adding our oak bourbon tincture to it, okay? My goodness, this is amazing. This is exactly what we were shooting for. We're talking about a winter warmer. Can you imagine just throwing this into a snifter glass, you know, a 6 to 8 ounce pour in December, January, February. It's cold outside, it's snowing. You're inside, you got your fireplace on, you pour a little snifter of this Wee Heavy. Holy cow, this is awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Man, this is almost making me wish we made more than 2 gallons. But again, this beer, drinking in small amounts, will last hopefully through the winter. And if it doesn't, we'll just make more. But okay, so the base is amazing. So now, like I told you, we got our little pipette here. We're gonna take some of this bourbon oak tincture that we made, and I don't know, I have here 3 ounces maybe. I'm just gonna add a few drops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna go with 5. And then I'm gonna use this as a stir stick too. You can do whatever you want. It's your beer, there's no rules, okay? So I'm gonna stir this around a little bit. Set this off to the side. I brought 2 glasses because I was gonna compare them side by side, but man, that concentrated oak tincture that we made with that Buffalo Trace bourbon, I put 5 tiny little drops into this. You can smell it right away. That oak flavor comes right through on the nose. Let's give it a taste. Wow. A completely different beer. If you gave this beer to someone and they didn't know that you flavored it with a tincture, they would 100% believe that you aged this in an oak barrel for 6 months to a year. Okay, this tastes exactly like any barrel-aged beer you're gonna have at a brewery, or you're gonna buy off the shelf in a liquor store or beer store. Man, that's good. Fantastic. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend trying this tincture method for moving forward with any oak aged beer you want. Because now look, not only did we not just add it completely to the keg, we have 8 ounces, well, 7 ounces. We got about 7 ounces of oak aged tincture left over. We're gonna put back in our mason jar, and we can use this for any beer moving forward. We make a stout and we wanna make it barrel aged. Here we go. We're gonna add some drops of this into it. We buy some beer at the store. Okay, you go and you buy some stouts or porters or barley wine or wee heavy at the store, and you pour it in your pint glass and you want to add a few drops of this to it. You've got a barrel aged liquid right here. You don't have an oak aged barrel that you have to store, that you have to clean, that you have to worry about having bacteria get into it and turn the barrel, which I've had happen before. We spent a few dollars on these oak chips. We already had the bourbon in our liquor cabinet. So, I mean, literally, we just made a barrel-aged version of a beer for, I think, less than $5. And it smells and tastes exactly like a barrel-aged beer. And we control 100% of the flavor. If I want more oak flavor, I add a few more drops. If I want less, I back off a little bit. But do this, try it. It is probably one of my favorite cheater methods. And I told you too, I've entered tinctured wood-aged beers in competitions and done extremely well. So even the most distinguished judges can't tell whether it was a tincture or if it was actually in a real barrel. So Cold Break, this is a phenomenal beer. I'm so glad we brewed it together. And I'm really excited to share the story behind this with you here too. Cheers. Awesome. So another great thing about craft beer and brewing and creating your own, whether it's your own recipes, your own brews that you're sharing with family and friends, is the creative side of it and the inspiration that comes from these beers. So this Scottish Wee Heavy, I have brewed in the past. It is one of my favorite winter warmer styles. It's such a great malt forward beer. You can add, your bourbon and your oak flavors to it, and it's a marriage in heaven for any craft beer lover. But the inspiration for this beer actually came from one of my good friends who is an amateur comic book writer and illustrator and artist and things like that. So he has a character named Big Jack. So this, let me introduce you to Jack Galloway. So a quick little Cliff Notes version of Jack Galloway. He's a local guy. He lives in post-apocalyptic West Michigan. This comic book series is set like 60 years into the future. There's these rabid, mutated wolves running around, zombies, and just a bunch of thugs that are, just out pillaging and doing what, God knows whatever. So Jack is this big Scotsman. His weapon of choice is his axe. And just his whole story is he's a family man, but he does everything he can to keep calm and survive day to day. So when I was reading through my buddy's comics here, I was like, man, if Jack Galloway ever sat down at the end of the night after a long day of killing zombies and fighting off mutated wolves and all those things, if he was to sit down and have a beer, what do you think he would have? And boy, Scottish Wee Heavy came to mind in a heartbeat. That was the inspiration for brewing this beer. Obviously, it's a beer I want to have on tap, and I'm gonna put some of these in cans too. So I'm gonna can some of this up. I'm gonna make a special label with Big Jack on it, and I'm going to name the beer Big Jack. So I'm going to share this beer with my buddy that writes these books. But that's the fun creative side of brewing, coming up with names and themes and labels and all of that for your beer. Now, do you have to do that? No, but it's one of my favorite parts of craft beer and being a craft beer enthusiast is giving each beer its own story. So cheers to Big Jack Galloway. Hopefully he can keep calm, survive this post-apocalyptic world here in West Michigan, I think in 2086. And at the end of the night, if he makes it through another day, he can crack open a Big Jack Scottish Wee Heavy and enjoy this around the campfire or, the fireplace with his family. Cheers. Cold break. We'll see you back, hopefully, for another episode of Who's Ready for a Cold One? Because you know what? I always am. Oh, that's good.